cuttings from an existing plant to produce a new transplant. So last week, Kathy asked the question, what plants can we create, what plants can we cut and then create new generations from? And so take a look at Module 7 Q&A. There's a really cool section on which crops, after they become a harvest, can we then create a new generation of plants from. So I wanted to continue that here. Here's what the idea is. So the idea is you have a plant and you're going to cut part of the stem of the plant. And if I were doing this, I would take new growth, because it's let's say you have a tomato plant. The new growth is not going to have any potential disease associated with it. Even if the rest of the plant might be diseased, that disease may not have made it to the new growth area. It's also the most vibrant part of the plant. So I would take the new growth part of a plant and I would cut a section that is at least 6 inches tall. All right. I would strip off any lower leaves. I would place the stem in water so that there's no leaves touching the water, because you don't want the water to get filled with bacteria or fungus, and so you're stripping off all those lower leaves. You want it to be colder water, and then you're basically waiting for 2-inch roots to form, and you want to clean that water every week, maybe even twice a week, to ensure that you're not getting any fungus or disease issues in there. The water should be clear, it should not be cloudy. And then basically after you get those roots, you can plant it into seed starting mix, and then you can transplant. So what does that look like? Last week I showed this particular slide. So herbs are classic for doing this. If your friends are growing herbs, so many of the herbs can be regrown. Not all of them, but most of them. Things like dill doesn't work, fennel doesn't really work. They work in other ways, but this way that I'm talking about here, where you're cutting a trimming and then basically you're growing some roots from that trimming and then you're planting that plant with its roots, this is very particular to the types of crops that I'm showing here. So mint, basil, cilantro, parsley, rosemary, oregano, lemongrass. Rosemary is so much easier to grow this way than it is to grow from seed. I would never grow rosemary from seed. And you can be ready to transplant when those roots are about 2 inches long. And in the picture here, you see basil, and it's in a water glass, and you can see that the roots are starting to form. All right? So that's what we're talking about. That's what I think we're talking about. So if you asked this question and you wanted different answer, or it was something different, let me know. Now, rosemary, like I said, is a crop that I would only grow this way. And so you can see here the lower parts of the stems cleared off, and after a little while roots start to form, and if you have it in water for a while, they will start to get denser and denser, those roots. And over here on the right hand, the farthest most right, not the clump of rosemary, but the one just before it, that I would say is ready to be put into some seed starting mix. And you want to get lots of either coconut coir or peat moss. Thinking of you, Deanna, and why have coconut coir or peat moss? You want to have a lot of that around so that it promotes good root growth. And then basically once it starts to grow again, what you'll find is that the root system is going to keep growing for a little while, and eventually once it grows, the root system grows, then the greenery will start to grow, and that's how you know that it's healthy and it's ready to be transplanted. Now you can do this with other crops. So this image on the right is a tomato stem. So tomatoes are something that if they ever fall over as a vine, they start to send out more roots. That's how they regain structure. So you can do this with tomatoes. All right. So similar, we talked about sweet potatoes earlier today, and I was talking about slips. This is exactly how slips work. So what you do is you take one of these slips off of the tuber, you strip off the lower leaves of that, you soak it in water. You want to keep the water clean and clear, and eventually that slip will have a lot of roots, and that's what you plant. That's typically what you're planting in order to put sweet potatoes in the ground. So what crops, the crops that I've done this for, and I'm trying to think if there's any other families that this works for. The idea here is most herbs, it's going to work. Tomato, tomatillo, pepper, eggplant, the tomato family, it's going to work pretty well. Sweet potato, similar, growing off those slips, all right? So those are the crops that this works pretty well for, and I feel like there's probably a video for this one that could be brewing for Module 8, because I think this is something that is coming up for people. It's very economical. Okay, cool. And then Kathy asked a question additional to this, so this is good. So she says, I have heard of people which have trees, bushes, etc., where they take a branch, root it, and get a new transplant. Cool. Yeah, so that's like a perennial. Typically, people call that propagation of cuttings, and so it's very similar to this. And I'll add, next week, I'm going to add more slides for this, Kathy. But the idea is that you take let's say you have a, I'm trying to think of a different kind of bush that you might want to propagate, a fruit bush of some sort, like a pawpaw tree or something. And you can take a branch of the pawpaw tree, and typically what you want to do is cut it at a diagonal on one end, so you know which end is the top and which end is the bottom. Maybe you cut it on the other end into like a V shape so that you know which end is down and which end is up. So make sure you do the same thing every time, where you have the end that's the bottom is shaped a particular way and the end that's the top shaped another way. And in between, you want branching. You want a single branch to be there, and you have enough to propagate then. And basically what you're going to do is you're going to put that in some water. You're going to make sure that the down part is down, and it will start to grow roots. And then from there, it's a very similar process. So I can show you more slides on that next week. I wasn't sure if you meant that it was vegetable plants or if you meant fruiting trees. So we can show a couple slides of propagating fruiting trees next week as well.
If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments below. We'd love to hear from you. And for more simple and practical gardening tips, subscribe to Grow Your Own Vegetables. For more tips and updates, visit gyov.org and join our growing community.